it is an amazing characteristic that we often forget, because we constantly feel like all we're doing is just fighting to stay alive. And so I think that's what people don't understand is, people always ask, why do you say you're Palestinian? Why don't you just say you're Arab? And it's largely because you just want, as I say in the play, you want to be acknowledged as an existing person. And so it's very, when those are really all you have, that's all you really have to hold on to, you're going to hold on to it. And so it's interesting. I mean, we are, and I don't even really speak of myself because I don't live there. I've had some unfortunate experiences, and a lot of my friends in Lebanon are like, don't come here anymore. Every time you come here, something happens. But, it's terrible, it's not. But, like, so considering, my life versus what people who really live, someone who grew up and born and raised in Gaza, whose parents saw, was sitting there and a bomb came on their house and saw their whole family of 40 cousins and parents and aunts and uncles just killed in front of her. Like, to that person, I really haven't endured anything, but it's hard to remember when you speak of tanks and things that, to even think that they might be feeling humiliated. But it's an interesting way of looking at it, so thanks.
All those years, what made you, how did you come to write?
That's a good question.
Hard to perform in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the whole evolution. Can you guys see me? I'm sorry, I just wanted to take a seat because it's been a long time. Honestly, as you can see in how I've written it and in the story itself, it was a gradual coming to terms with my identity, the way that most young people do. And it's very important for me to point out to people that I was raised in the 80s and I was Lebanese and Palestinian. And I started school in 1979 when there were hostages in Iran. And I was in 2nd grade when Israel invaded Lebanon, which is where my mom was from. And I was in 8th grade when the Palestinian Intifada, it was always there. And it was, at that time, there was much less information known about what was actually going on in the Middle East. And it was the most unpopular position in the world to be. I mean, it's fascinating to me that the war in Beirut, in Lebanon, ended more than 20 years ago, and people still think that Beirut is this disgusting place with bomb shelters everywhere and people hiding and blowing each other up, because it's not. It's actually a fully functioning city, and it has been. I mean, the country is fully functioning and has been for a very long time. And even in 2006, when the Israelis blew up the south, within 6 months it was all rebuilt. So anyway, so I grew up during this time where it was very unpopular, and I was so confused because I didn't really understand, because none of the parts of me fit in. I wasn't Muslim. I wasn't all the things that they were telling me an Arab was. I'd never seen a Muslim pray until I was on the boat with those people going to Mecca. I was like, what are they doing? And I was just not, and so it was mostly I don't understand, so I shut up. And then, but when you, well, also, I was saying this earlier when we were talking, I grew up and I wanted to I was never good at history and facts, and I can't have those arguments that a lot of people can have where they spew UN Resolution 24, the stuff that my dad would talk about on TV, and I didn't understand it, and I didn't think, it wasn't interesting to me, and I thought that that's what you had to do to be an activist or to care, and I was just completely uninterested. And as I got older, I've just turned this into a book, a memoir, and it's fascinating because I made a timeline of what was happening in the world, and each of what's happening in the world and what happened in my life, and how old I was corresponded with some other traumatic, as I said, 82, and then 88, and then 92 we went on that trip, and then I was in college during the Oslo years, and I went to Princeton, which is a very unpolitically involved school. So it was I was just a Princeton girl. And then I graduated, and then we, in the years leading up to 9/11 and the Second Gulf War, and and I was trying to be a professional actress, and that was when I encountered the sort of, you know, subtle but institutionalized racism in the Hollywood, you know, in being an actor, basically, because I would not want, I don't understand the idea of changing your name, like in this modern world anyway, but in general, I'm not going to change my name. And so I wouldn't change my name, and then I feel that I would get auditions for like this dark, exotic Arab person, and I would come in and be this New Yorker, and they'd be like, aren't you Jewish or something? And people would be like, why? You should be able to play anything. You remind me of like Marissa Tomei, you're like a New York girl, and I'm like, but I can't, no one ever like sends me out for those auditions. And then I was like grappling with this, and I was thinking, well, I could change my name, but then it would look like I was hiding my identity, which is ridiculous because my dad's already very famous. So I don't want to change my name, but if I insist, if people ask me where I'm from and I answer honestly, it somehow becomes a political statement. If you say you're Palestinian, they're like, there's a Palestinian in the play. Isn't that an amazing political statement we're making here? So it was the world, like, and then it just kept going with what was going on in the world, and then 9/11. And then all of a sudden, Arab American, Arab American, Arab American, Arab American. What do you think is an Arab American? And I was just like, I think I just lost my opportunity to have any sort of a mainstream career, which is frustrating because when you become an actor, most of us want to just do Shakespeare and be anyone. And then we're like, you can play the lady with the scarf on her head. And, you know, it was frustrating. So what happened was myself and a couple of like other Arab American actors started a theater company because we were all going through this exact same thing. And we did a play about, it was called Sajal Record, and we interviewed people all over the country asking them, what does the word Arab mean to you? Or what comes to mind when you hear the word Arab? And all of the Americans would say like oil, desert, camel, terror, evil, Muslim. And all of the Americans would say, or Arabs would say, home, love, family, food, comfort. And so that was like the premise of the play, and we did this. And then, again, all of the plays that were coming out and all the auditions were for plays about what's going on in Iraq. And so you can play an Iraqi woman, or you can play, and I found that the opportunities were lacking. This is the longest answer I'm sure for. This was originally a journal entry that I had written when my father died, the first part about the story. I was literally like in a very adolescent manner at the age of 29 listening to my iPod, and I heard the Tori Amos song, the Crucify song, that I have that whole scene in Gaza where I'm listening to it and feeling like tortured. And it came on my iPod, and I started writing this thing. And so then a couple of years later, I was working with this theater company that I started, and we were working in high schools. And we were writing an identity piece for them to relate to, and I said, I want to write something like this. And my friends were like, just do that. So I performed it, and then over time, New York Theater Workshop, this incredible theater in New York, encouraged me to develop it and invited me to, and I was like, I don't have anything more to say. But they found me this amazing director, Sturgis Warner, who would just ask me questions. And like literally we had a version of the play that was an hour and 20 minutes, and he still didn't know that I'd been in Lebanon during the war. Mm-hmm. And he was like, what? We have to go back and like add that section. You didn't even mention the war twice. And I'm like, oh, I forgot. And so it kept growing, and then I started doing it and like sort of developing it as readings. And I was so petrified. But it's ironically, I was doing it so that people could see who I really was, and I was defining my own Arabness by explaining my background. But what it grew into was this whole other thing where people were, for some reason, I guess, because I started off with the whole Jewish and New York thing, people were disarmed right away and were willing to listen. And then I realized it was just like talking to someone the way I talk to people in New York all the time, who may be Zionist and disagree with me. But they talked to me as a human being. And so anyway, it grew into this thing, and then it became, do you want to do a production? And I was like, I want a job, sure. You know, I don't, like, that's the thing about actors. We're like, I just want to have a job. And so I was like, definitely. I was so excited that the people who wanted to produce it, but I was petrified, because just the minute we sent out our first fundraising email, the New York Times wanted to do an article. What's it like to fundraise for a play called Palestine? And I had said, I'm not really sure that that's the title, but it was the working title. And so then it seemed to be like this thing that you weren't supposed to have that as a title, because you'd never get produced in New York, and no one would ever play. So then I was like, I want that title. And so I kept doing these things as sort of like obnoxious little girl in a way that I've always been, like, don't tell me who I am and what I'm, and it sort of grew into this thing. And then I think what was really fascinating is that what I learned from my parents was how to relate to human beings, was how to talk to people, and all I did was tell my own story in that same way. And I think that, to me, it wasn't really about speaking out, it was more about like, this is my story, let me explain, because it doesn't really make sense. And I think also calling myself out on the whole, like, hating it and thinking it was dirty, I think that was also important, because I think that, I just want it to be clear that I'm a person who's stuck in this, like all of us are, and that it still doesn't make any sense, and I don't have any answers, but I don't know what I'm saying. But so that's how I don't know, I just fell into it. But I think because there were people behind me that were supporting me, it was much easier.
Yeah, have you performed it, or are there plans to perform it in the Middle East? And what feedback have you gotten from Middle Easterners?
That's a really good question. I thought when I wrote it, it was for Americans only. And when I would see like my parents' Lebanese friends or Palestinian friends in the audience, I'd be like, oh my God, they're gonna be so bored, and they're gonna make fun of me for like just writing this simple little play, being like, I love Arabic. But they loved it. And I think what's really interesting is, I did a play last year where I actually played an Israeli character, and I forget what happened, but I had like a couple of Hebrew lines, and there were a couple of people in the audience who were like, I'm Israeli, and your accent wasn't perfect, and your Hebrew sound, and I'm like, okay. But when I watch plays and someone's speaking Arabic, and this is actually how most Arabs feel, we don't really, I mean, of course we're like, why can't they say the word right? Yes, we hear that, but we're more like so happy to hear people speaking our language. And so let me just say that even though I was talking about Israeli, that wasn't a politically motivated comment. But there are languages that, you know, if you hear a person doing a French accent or a Spanish accent, you're like, well, that wasn't perfect. She didn't sound like she was from the Dominican Republic. She sounded like she was from Peru. And I'm like, oh, well, Arabs are really happy when they hear their language spoken on stage, because they feel like they are being represented and they belong. And so that's mostly what I felt. And then I was in Lebanon in December, and literally in Beirut, walked down the street. Oh, we know you from the YouTube. When are you doing the... And then in Lebanon, like in Arabic, there's these phrases that translate funny in English, so they'll be like, I don't know why you refuse to come here. And I'm like, I'm not standing there in the corner, like stomping my feet, going like, I refuse to perform here. I've been invited, but not. This happens in the States as well. It happens everywhere. People want you to come, but then they don't realize that you're an actual person who makes money doing this, and they have to pay for you to have a place to stay, and like, you know, you're not just going to show up with a full-on set. And this is the portable version of the show, and I do it with the script so that you have a little bit less of, you're aware that it's not the full version, but it's more or less the same thing, but it's in a smaller space. So, a lot of people in Lebanon really want me to do it there, and a lot of my Lebanese family and friends have said, you have to do it in Lebanon, because you say so much that the Lebanese need to hear, which I think people forget, because the Lebanese don't get off easy in this piece at all, and those are things that are not totally talked about in Lebanon, because when you're in the Middle East, it's always like, well, it's all of us against America and Israel, but you don't get to talk so much about the internal political mechanisms that discriminate against each other. And some of my mom's friend, she and her husband watched the DVD, and they were like, you absolutely have to do it here. You have to do it here in Lebanon. It's very important that people see this. But you have to change some of the lines about Lebanon, or just take them out. Like about the Palestinian refugees and I don't say anything like the reason that Arab countries refuse to give Palestinian citizenship is because they're trying to assert these are Palestinians, they deserve to go back to Palestine. But it does work out nicely in another way that we're not letting them be Lebanese. So I'm not saying that like that's what the law is about. I'm just pointing out that it's interesting. And so it's not like they don't know that in Lebanon. Do you know what I mean? So anyway.